I remember there was a fruit machine in my parents' basement. I did cave in at one point and, to my shame, smashed the box and took the contents out. In one click of a mouse button, I made more than I was making in a year in one night.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Jack, the co-founder of Gamban. Jack, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
So let's start by finding out more about you. What is it that you've gone through in your life, and what do you do now as a result?
Specifically on the gambling side of things, I think turning a problem that I had into a solution that helps others. There's a line I heard which I like. I can't claim ownership to it, but it's recover loudly so others don't have to suffer silently. And I think that's really, really important. I think with gambling, particularly online gambling, which is in a different level of maturity and establishment in the UK as it is elsewhere in the world, I just recognized that problems were being experienced left, right, and center. And it was so difficult at the time to avoid it. It wasn't until about 2018 where bringing things together. But what I will say, Rob, is when I started this, I had no idea that it would become such a political zeitgeist, a hot potato. I didn't know that it would become like this.
So how did you start gambling? And it became a problem for you. So when did that really happen?
I started playing poker online. I wasn't great at poker, but I wasn't terrible. I had this thing where if I won $20, I don't know why it was like this, but if I won $20, I'd withdraw that and I'd keep playing with whatever I had in my account. But then increasingly, I don't know why I remember this, but it was in like the top right-hand side of the poker table screen, that some of the poker sites I played on, I think it was PokerStars and Full Tilt, started introducing mini games and these games are kind of, I always think of them as like YouTube shorts or what's it called, where you endless scrolling things. It's for the hyperactive brain that just wants some action at all times. You could speed through a hand. If you didn't want to play that hand, you just close it off and you go to the next hand. But if you wanted to sit and play poker, sometimes when you're not in the game, it's a little bit quiet. So you just play a few hands of blackjack up in the corner of the screen without even leaving. And then gradually, poker doesn't really give you what those stupid little mini games gave you. And then you kind of move on to casino, where you get that sort of feeling of excitement, of dopamine and all that kind of stuff.
So basically you were playing poker and you weren't really experiencing any compulsiveness with it, not really an addiction. And these games are in the corner of the screen, and that's what's tempting you to start spending more money, start gambling more often. What about the games gave you that thrill? I mean, we've talked about a little bit like the speed at which it happened, but a poker player, they typically think very mathematically, they think strategically. What made you look at those games differently?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think I still played poker like a gambler. I knew people who were playing poker mathematically. That's not how I was playing. But I think those games, those other games, it was like condensing it down to something a lot more artificial and immediate. For me, there's two things that I've always had from gambling. One is the excitement, the sort of immediacy of it. And the other thing is the meditative element of it, which some people seek that and others don't. Stacey Goodwin described it so eloquently and articulately as the numbness of the mind, and that's exactly what it's done. All those games tended to sort of play with that, the sort of the ability to just switch off, press buttons. I'd say it's poker, casino, slots, and then slots and casino. But slots, by the time you're there, for most people, I would say it's a time bomb.
Why did you seek the meditative state that came from the gambling? What was the reason that you were gambling?
I don't think I was running from anything. I think I was more perhaps bored at times. I've heard, you and I have been to a lot of these conferences, and we'll hear about clinical diagnoses of why people seek out gambling, and it might be trauma, escaping. Like for me, I guess there are other clues in my life, like overeating, food as an addiction. With gambling, I feel like other people, if they start out like I did, it's not as clear as masking a problem. Do you know what I mean? It's entirely possible that people start it because their mates are gambling, or perhaps it looks quite cool, or perhaps they know someone who made a lot of money and they think that there's an opportunity to give it a go.
So, Jack, we've talked about how you got started with your gambling with poker. How old were you at this point?
I think I was 14, but my sense of chronology is terrible. I've been aware of the game of poker way before that, but as soon as I could, I would sign up, and I enjoyed sort of playing social games and things like that. The flashy lights of gambling weren't new to me at 14. I was aware of, the excitement. I remember there was a fruit machine in my parents' basement. I don't think I was allowed to play it. I think maybe the poker was a gateway. On the other hand, it might not have been. It might have just been there's no way of knowing this, but it might have been that I just went straight to slots and casino at a time that that I needed that. For me, casino and slots weren't a problem. They were fun things to do, and whether or not they were solving another problem that I had that I was masking, or problems I had that I was masking, I don't know. These games, characters that you're familiar with from TV and movies, and seem perfectly innocuous and a bit exciting. It doesn't take long before you get hooked on these things.
Was there any socialization aspect to it? Did you start with the poker because your friends were playing? Were you talking about it when you were going to school? Or was this done totally on your own?
At any point where I was playing online, it was a solo activity. I remember at university playing in the poker society. Do remember some of the gambling companies trying to, I seem to remember quite a large amount of money floating around as a sponsorship number. And certainly at university is when I was able to gamble living by myself. I had very supervision, if you like. I had a lot of autonomy. So that's definitely when I guess it became more of a problem. The points at which, and I say points because as I say, it was a cumulative decision to stop. They wouldn't come until much, much later. I think gambling is quite feasible to be to hide a problem, no matter how crippling it is.
100%. That's what gets floated around every time I have one of these conversations. Is we're always touching back on the point that it's really, really difficult to even realize that you yourself have a gambling problem to a certain extent, because the natural flow of things is to start to question the results rather than the reasoning behind what you're doing. The result being, I don't have a gambling problem. I'm just down money right now because I'm not good or something to that extent.
Yeah.
And you fight through all of those before you get to the point where you're like, shit, I've just been gambling every day now. Maybe it is like a frequency, a compulsive problem.
And it's also masked as other problems. You might be procrastinating. You might be saying, well, look, I'll stop next week. All the chasing and the, at what point are you back to square one? So it's a very difficult thing. And you try telling someone who's just won money that you can't make money gambling. I had one win, I think it was back in 2014, where in one click of a mouse button, I made more than I was making in a year in one night, in one moment. Just so exciting. I know intellectually that it won't happen again. There's an emotional part of me that felt for a very long time that if it happened once, it could happen again. And that was a very transformative experience, and possibly one of the worst things that can happen to someone, to win money.
So you're saying that with one click of a button, you made more than your yearly salary, and it ended up being a bad thing.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, so I think, let's say it was a Thursday or a Friday. I had to go the whole weekend not knowing if I would actually get paid out. So there was this whole up and down emotional roller coaster that happened even after winning the money, that I might not even get the money out. Because I know that these gambling operators can mess you around a little bit with bonus abuse and things like that. So I didn't know, because it's not always that easy, perhaps intentionally, to know if you're playing within the bonus guidelines. There was a brief period where I just wasn't sure if I was going to get paid out, and then that money hit my bank account. I did some okay things with the money, but I think I handed quite a bit of it back. But the point is, particularly when you're a bit younger, and I was then, there's no one that can say that you can't make money gambling because the proof is in your bank account. You feel like it's brought you back to whatever square one looks like. I don't know if it did or not. And you also feel like, clever me. I won. I did it. And I did nothing. I pressed a button. I guess it begs the question. And for me, it changed a lot of things. I became a different gambler from that point on. I became a jackpot gambler. And the distinction there is that, firstly, on games I didn't even like, I was looking for games with relatively good jackpots. I was betting way out of line in terms of any kind of like return to player percentages or anything like that. I was playing just to win big, and I was playing ultimately for a lot more money than was rational or realistic given my budget, in order to win something similar to what I had won before. And there's that kind of feeling that you only have to hit once, or in this case twice, and the investment, if you like, will pay off. But it is so true what they say. I know it's almost become a cliche now, but the house always wins, and over time, even if you win, you hand it back. I think emotionally, points I knew that I had to stop is when the displeasure I got from losing was greater than the pleasure I got from winning. Even still, and the only way that I've ever been able to articulate this is usually with the help of a diagram, but like, if my mood is a flat line, and by playing I am winning, I take myself above the line, and losing, I take myself below the line. Or winning and losing, I'm dodging that line like a madman. I mean, that's an amazing alternative to an otherwise flat mood. Eventually, I don't even care if I'm above the line anymore. I'll take below as a state change every day of the week. Someone said to me the other day with food, the apple test. And I love this. It's like, for me, it's an apple, but for you, it might be something else. If you're not hungry enough to eat an apple, then you're not hungry. And so with slots, I would play just because I wanted a state change. I would play just because I wanted to experience something, even if it was a negative experience. But over time, you realize that the negative, the displeasure you get from losing is heavier, if that's the right word, than the pleasure you get from winning. And I think, friends of mine who have seen me at a casino winning maybe 1,000, a couple of thousand at a time, can see it on my face. I'm not even that bothered. You become accustomed to these wins and losses, and that's another thing. Tolerating losses becomes greater. I remember when I started out, I mentioned $20 on poker, and I'd withdraw, and like, eventually you just become easier at forgiving yourself in the wrong way. You know what I mean? It's like, we're taught to be self-compassionate, but we're not taught to be self-indulgent. And the difference is maybe it's a coping mechanism, but you do start to tolerate greater and greater losses, even if you can't afford them.
I can relate to that. It's this, you just get used to it.
Yeah.
This is what happens.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
So dangerous. I remember, I won't say with who, but I was at a betting shop. No, do you know what? I think it was £1. So just over $1. And they felt so stupid for having lost it. I was just trying to work out how much I would have to lose to feel that same sense of stupidity. And at the time, it was 20 times that. It was £20 or like $25. So that was kind of an interesting experience for me, that early on in my sort of time I was gambling, that was the multiple of tolerance I had at that point, of someone who I felt had a fairly normal relationship with gambling. And over time, it got worse.
Do you remember the point at which you decided to seek help?
Yeah,
What happened?
There were times after heavy losses. Now, I don't know, and because we know that this is a really important time to get people into a safe pair of hands, to make sure that protection is put in place to prevent this from happening again in the future. But immediately after heavy losses is when I was most receptive to help and support. And that's my better self kicking in. Obviously there's self-loathing and things going on, but that's the point where I'm saying, look, I cannot do this again for whatever reason. And I'm also vulnerable enough at that point to drop ego, drop everything else, and say, look, I need help. In my case, after losing amounts that scared me, I remember calling helplines, speaking with family, whoever I was with at the time. It didn't take one time to stop. And I think that's, there's this sort of difference and distinction that needs to be made between lapsing and relapse and in recovery. The idea that, recovery doesn't have to look perfect. It can be a bit of a messy process. The idea of with gambling, I think, it's fairly clear that cold turkey is the best approach. I know that Jodie Bechtold from the Better Institute, we were talking about this a while ago, and she talked about, getting to abstinence. Sorry if I've paraphrased this incorrectly, but the idea of, tapering is fine if that's what it takes. I got quite good at quitting, which I know is a bit of a common thing. You hear people kicking cigarettes, saying that they've got good at quitting. But I could give up for maybe 2 weeks at a time, and then maybe at 2 a.m, I'm bored. I'll just play $20, something small like that. The next 20, the next, all right, in for 40. Let's do 100, and then I'm back to where I was before. So with the accessibility of it, not having to get in your car and go to a casino, it's just easy to fall back into it. So that very much was when it became problematic. I wasn't able to permanently stop.
Is that why you made Gamban?
Yeah.
So what is Gamban, and why did you create it?
So I started it in 2015. The idea of it was, so first of all, I was using a Mac computer at the time. I can't remember what kind of phone I was using, but any existing alternative, so gambling blocking software that you install on your devices that prevents you from being able to gamble online, any product that existed didn't work on the tech I was using. So I was trying to all I did on my computer was I just changed the hosts file with a whole list of blocking with domains. I'd added something like, I just very quickly hashed a database together. I put 16,000 domains onto an Excel list, copied it into my computer, and that computer, save but for the fact that I knew how to remove it as easily as I knew how to put it on, was unable to access gambling sites. It was a safe computer for me. So prior to that point, my options were get another computer, get rid of my phone, and get like a dumb phone. But at the time I needed Facebook and WhatsApp, so I wouldn't have been able to use that. I'd cut my cards up more times than I can even remember. I've self-excluded individually from every gambling site that I ever played on. So, and I knew that the gambling companies at this point, there wasn't a self-exclusion scheme at this point. I knew that whatever I did, I had to sort of take control into my own hands. I used parental control software, which was fine until they made an update that made it easier for admins, so parents, to do the protecting. So I was able to uninstall that as easily as I was able to install it. As soon as I had a version of Gamban, i.e. something that I just hashed together and put on my Mac, I guess Gamban was born from that point. And it's over the last approaching a decade, the bones of it are the same, but where we are now, it's just a world of difference in terms of all the things that we've sought to make it effective, to make it safe, to make it affordable, accessible, cross-platform, to make it non-intrusive, to get the balance of blocking right. Because that's, we could talk for ages on just how we block and the importance of getting balance. Because if I learned one thing in the early days of Gamban, it's that blocking a site that should be blocked, that's what it's intended to do. Blocking a site that shouldn't be blocked is as annoying, if not more so, than not blocking a site that should be blocked. When you're dealing with thousands and thousands of customers, you make one screw up like that and it's difficult to recover from. It's so cool to have a product that I don't feel like I need to use it at the moment, though there are times I'm aware, to have the tools in your toolkit and to know that it can help you when your guard is down, when willpower's not enough.
Yeah, what really draws me to the story is that you created this to be the solution that you needed, and now it's available for thousands of people to download for what is the same problem. And that's kind of the inspiration behind why I create this video content, because I don't know how to code, so I don't know how to make a thing like Gamban, but
Sure.
It's trying to help someone that's going through the same thing that you went through. That's what really draws me to the story. That's what draws me to the product. And I'm happy that you're still doing the work that you do. It's helping people.
It comes back to that: recover loudly so people don't have to suffer silently.
100%. And, we were talking a little bit earlier, one side thing before we kind of wrap up. We were talking a little bit earlier about how during this call, you probably got a couple casino offers emailed to you as we were talking.
Let me just check.
And it's crazy because out of all the people on earth, the guy that made the software that literally blocks casinos from your devices is getting advertisements for those same casinos.
Okay, I haven't got a bonus offer on whilst we've been speaking, but I have got a request from a gambling affiliate to write blog posts on Gamban to attract vulnerable people using Gamban to gamble on. Yeah, so close enough. Probably worse.
I get those in my DMs all the time. It's like, how much for a Instagram story will give you 25% of everyone's losses for the first 3 months? Like, dude, did you even watch the last video I put out? It's literally about you. Like, what are you doing?
You sleep at night. Yeah, it's messed up.
I think that as humans, we're kind of prone to taking the path of least resistance because, like,
Yeah.
a counterpoint that could be made is we've never had more technology to be healthier than ever before, right? Like, right now, you could
That's true.
theoretically have a gym in your pocket. You could have a personal trainer, a personal chef, like giving you recipes and stuff like that. But it's also that you have one-click access to the food, the porn, the gambling. You can order alcohol, you can order weed on your phone. And so it's like, which of the two paths are we going to see more people going down?
And I guess there are push factors and pull factors towards each of these things. I was reading recently, it was in relation to porn. It made the point, and I thought this was really interesting, the feeling of, I didn't think we'd be talking about this today, but the feeling of horniness is a feeling of dis-ease. The seeking out of something to satisfy that is actually trying to ameliorate sensation that's not particularly pleasant. And I think there's possibly a similar thing going on with gambling. If you're not getting the excitement you need, and perhaps if you're on any kind of SSRI or antidepressant, it's likely that your mood will be by default a little bit more flat. And if that's the case, you do tend to seek out these sort of things, whatever it is that you find. And I use this kind of metaphor a lot. We talk about sort of finding your rock bottom, hitting rock bottom, and the idea of sort of looking into the abyss, peering into the abyss, falling through. It's really how far do you need to go before eventually you pick yourself up or get picked up. Gambling, to me, online is one of a number of things. Of all the things that you can get addicted to online, digital addictions, gambling is one of the few things that has multiple layers that can be woven together to create an effective barrier. I know this because in 2018, when GamStop, the self-exclusion scheme, went live, and Gamban had reached a little bit more efficacy in the way that we blocked. I just remember 2018 for me was so exciting because even if I wanted to gamble online, I couldn't. And let me define couldn't. With enough time and energy, by time maybe 2 hours. That's kind of what I thought. It might take me 2 hours to find a gambling site that I had to use some kind of balmy cryptocurrency on. That wasn't regulated, so even if I did win, I wouldn't get my money out, and by that point, Craving's gone. So for me, like 2018 was such an exciting time because it still required me to process and recover from it, but it was like having one hell of a lock on the drinks cabinet. I even bought a device, it's called a kitchen safe. They're really cool. It's a transparent, I think they're mostly transparent, so you can see what's inside it. And there's a thing at the top, and you turn it, you set a timer on it, and that timer can be days, months, weeks. You can put anything you want in there, and I won't say exactly what I put in there, but I put stuff in there, and then I turned the lock and I left it. I did cave in at one point, and to my shame, smashed the box and took the contents out. So I'm aware that what we deal with as individuals, and certainly what I deal with running Gamban, is two sides of a self. And I think there's probably more than two, but there's like the better self. There's the concept of someone who knows what they should and shouldn't be doing, and then there's the I guess that it's been portrayed and characterized as like a monkey that just wants to get at whatever it is that gives that excitement, and it will go to great lengths to get what it wants.
It doesn't seem like the advertising's going away. It doesn't seem like there's going to be less gambling. Where do you see the future of gambling addiction going, and how is Gamban going to play a role in reducing the amount of harm that people are experiencing?
I definitely think there's this convergence of trading, gaming, crypto, gambling. I don't necessarily know that gambling over the next 10, 20 years is going to be this kind of green felt activity. You know what I mean? I don't think it's all going to, so I think it's going to look a little bit different. But I think you hit the nail on the head with adding and introducing volatility to existing products. I think that's quite likely, partly because it's a way of shoehorning in a bit more profit into existing regulated products. I think with things like gaming, I think it's quite likely that there'll be more of a gambling element. Obviously, we've seen things like loot boxes, but sites that allow you to gamble with in-game currency,
Mm.
or really with cryptocurrency or any other form of currency is quite likely. We'll see other things like derivatives of things like lotteries and competitions and things that, you know, are sort of disguised as skill-based games. And I think maybe things that are games of chance disguised as skill-based games will become quite popular, but they'll still ultimately be games of chance. You ask a big question there: how are we going to block it? I mean, a lot of this stuff, the difficulty is that regulators don't understand. They're always going to be a little bit behind understanding and respecting the fact that these things are going to be more emergent and fast-paced. We just have to keep a finger on the pulse. Where there's money to be made, I think, you know, there's obviously a move towards, to a degree, innovation. There's a part of me that feels quite strongly when it comes to innovation, we'll put up with a lot of destruction. I mean, we do with things, with terrible things like war brings great innovation. It also brings a hell of a lot of a lot of problems too. I think one of the things that I find rapacious, I don't know any other word for it, is the idea that all the harm that gambling creates, and it not exactly innovating as much as it can. I mean, I've seen very little innovation other than increasing volatility, which I don't 100% know. Probably need about another quarter of an hour or so to articulate that point better, but I guess improving the player journey, for example, is not that impressive a task when it comes to innovation in the gambling sector. Adopting things like VR and AR and this kind of stuff, okay, that's kind of fun. Sorry, one of the biggest observations that I've got is seeing Me Too casinos popping up left, right, and center with very little that distinguishes one from another. In that saturated market, and you asked me about, you know, getting messages whilst we're speaking, they are doing increasingly desperate things to acquire new players, and then those kind of activities are being sanctioned and validated by the industry because they're willing to acquire these organizations that you know, that scrape the barrel in order to get acquired. The bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, with gambling and gambling recovery is that you have to put protection, but you have to put recovery into your own hands. And you know, there are barriers and there are things and tools and support that exist. I don't think there's any help that you can expect to get from the gambling industry.
Jack, thanks for being on. I really appreciate you sharing your story. To anyone that's watching that wants to hear another story of gambling harm, check out this video. And until we figure everything out, let's just keep getting better together, one day at a time.